All right. Welcome back to Dev Chats. My name is Charles. I'm a developer advocate at Stripe. I'm joined by Cecil Phillip, another developer advocate at Stripe, and Apollo GraphQL's very own Peggy. Thanks for joining us, Peggy.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to talk GraphQL with y'all today.
Oh, we are super excited as well. So before we hop into it, we have some really brief developer updates. So I'm just going to go ahead here and share my screen real quick. So first and foremost, our first update is a pretty small one, but a pretty cool one. If you're using Stripe checkouts, you can now control the font as well as the shape of some of the elements that is actually on the Stripe hosted payment form. So that's pretty cool. So you can see you can change the fonts as you see here. You can also change the shape of like the buttons as well as the inputs. So I can change this from rounded to pill. So that's pretty cool. The next update is a pretty big one and impactful one. So we just launched ACH direct debit payments the other day for our newer API. So that's payment intents, that's the payment element, that's Stripe checkout, invoices, and payment links. Now, if you're wondering, why should I even bother using ACH direct debits? Here's the breakdown. One, ACH payments are quite a bit cheaper. We're talking 0.8% with a max fee of $5 versus 2.9 and 30 cents. ACH payments fail less often because bank accounts, unlike cards, don't expire, don't get lost, and don't get reported stolen. And then finally, ACH is less likely to have like fraudulent charges because ACH has verification friction, like micro deposits, where you have to, add in certain amounts to verify that you own the account, or instant verification. So there's less fraud. So that's our main updates for today. Now, if you want to actually integrate, it, it's actually very, very straightforward. You go to your Stripe dashboard, and if you're using payment links, the payment element, checkout, anything like that, you simply go to your settings, you go to payment methods, and you go to where it is, and you click, you turn it on. And that's the entire integration. You will want to make sure that you have webhooks. But if you are integrating any of those surfaces, you should have them. Speaking of webhooks, we actually dropped a video on handling asynchronous payments, of which ACH direct debit is one. So check out this video if you like some information about how to actually set up webhooks for ACH direct debits. We also have some videos on our no-code payment pages with Zapier and Stripe payment links. So if you're interested in building a no-code integration, save yourself some code, save yourself some testing, check this one out. I'm joined by a software engineer, Cass Hill from Zapier. So it's pretty cool video. We also had a Stripe dev with Alex, our head of corporate strategy at Stripe, as well as the head of product of Watershed, where we talked about building great products and platforms. So if you are product minded, or you just want to know some philosophies and thoughts around how to build great products, check that one out. And then finally, our own Mr. Stripe developer, CJ Villa, has a really awesome video on simplify invoice creation using Python notebooks. So definitely check that one out. And with that, let's get into it. So, Peggy, I feel like I didn't quite give you the chance to introduce yourself. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the director of developer experience at Apollo. And if you're not familiar with Apollo, we are a platform for building a graph. You may have heard of some of our popular open source tools like Apollo Client and Apollo Server. We also have Apollo Studio, which is like your all-in-one GraphQL IDE, tons of really great tools for managing your graph. And so my team at Apollo, our mission is to inspire and equip developers everywhere to be successful with Apollo. So we tackle that in a couple different ways. We have our DevRel team; they're always out there in the community me bringing developers' pain points and then figuring out how to solve them, with either code or content. The education team is also in my org, and they build really awesome learning experiences for our developers. So making sure that our docs are complete and delightful to use, as well as building our learning platform, Odyssey, which we launched last year and has just been really, really impactful for developers learning GraphQL, just giving them that clear learning path and making it really fun and exciting along the way.
That's super cool. So like, let's jump right into it. So I guess for some of the developers who might be team REST, who may never used like GraphQL or even heard of, I can't imagine someone not have heard, heard of it as a developer, but like, let's say someone has. So like, what is GraphQL?
Yeah, so GraphQL is just a query language for communicating about data. I think that's just the simplest way to describe it, right? You'll define like a schema, and that's just all of the available data that your GraphQL API has. And then on the client, you'll write queries in order to access that data. And the cool thing about GraphQL is although, a lot of the interest comes from the JavaScript and React developers, it's just a spec, which means it can be implemented in any language. And so GraphQL has support in just about any programming language under the sun. Developers are creating graphs in Kotlin and Ruby and Python, and not just using it for web apps, but also using it for mobile apps, IoT. Because of its flexibility, it's a really great solution for any developer that has a lot of different data sources to manage and a lot of different clients as well.
All right. I mean, that's pretty cool. I mean, shoot, I was going to ask you like, why use GraphQL, but you kind of already answered that one for us. It sounds like a pretty powerful tool. So I know you prepared some stuff to show us really what GraphQL is about. So if you want to, hop into it, we can totally start taking a look at GraphQL and doing some fun stuff.
Yeah, let's do it. So I figured the first thing that I would show is just our learning platform, Odyssey, because it's a really great just like entry into the world of GraphQL if you've never used it before. So this is our learning platform, Odyssey, which you can access at apollographql.com/tutorials. And so once you're here, we have a number of different courses that are aimed to help you build your first graph and deploy it to production and integrate it into an app. And so we'll just check out like the first course, which is Liftoff 1. What's really cool is these courses are like 30 to 40 minutes long. So if you're curious about GraphQL, you can just like learn it on your lunch break. It's not going to take, hours upon hours to do. We wanted to make it just really quick and simple. And so this is kind of what you'll see when you'll enter the course. Each course is a mix of like these short form videos, as well as interactive code challenges and quizzes. And then we also have kind of the transcript as well. If you're not like a video learner, you can go through and just kind of peruse the transcript as you wish. So why don't we just hop right into the schema page, just because, so this is actually what you'll build in the first course. So we'll just today take a look at like how to build that API powering this React app. But first I want to jump into the schema. So I'm curious, have y'all like built GraphQL schemas before? Like what's been your experience with that?
So I personally have never built a GraphQL schema. I did like join Hasura I think Hasura HQ, like they're another company that does stuff with GraphQL.
Yeah.
And so I've interacted with it through that particular service, but I've never actually made a schema myself. They kind of did that for me magically somehow, I think.
Yeah.
I haven't put GraphQL in production, but I have played around with some tutorials. I'm a .NET person, and so
Oh, nice.
in the .NET space, there's this thing called Hot Chocolate,
Yeah.
And Banana Cake Pop, which really fun names. So Hot Chocolate is like the GraphQL server, and Banana Cake Pop is the UI, right? Like where you design the schemas and you issue queries and things of that nature. And so I've played around with
Yeah.
like tutorials and like demos and stuff like that using those types of things. But I'm guessing, because obviously you work for Apollo, right? So I'm guessing Apollo has its own I guess GraphQL server and implementation of that, right? Because obviously we're looking at Odyssey and you have like these really cool samples we'll go through, but like Apollo itself is like a GraphQL server, right? And you could start building stuff on top of.
Yeah, so we have a lot of different tools, including a server. So we have a server that's written in JavaScript and TypeScript. So it's a really great way to like build your first graph. Then we have the client. So we have implementations for both web as well as iOS and Kotlin. And then we also have federation. So as your graph grows and you want to kind of split that into microservices, federation will compose those graphs together for you. And to the client, it's only like one graph, which is really cool. But yeah, I've never played around with the .NET implementation. That's something that's been on my list. I think the developers who built it, they're called Chili Cream or something.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. They're doing really awesome work in the community. But yeah, definitely on my list to check out. So for anyone that hasn't built a GraphQL schema before, I like to describe it as just like a menu of all of the available data that you may have. And so you kind of put them together like this. You have, the type, and then you can kind of attach different properties. So let's actually dive into the app that you would build if you took the first liftoff course. So diving into kind of the entry point into Apollo server, like I said before, that's our open source GraphQL server implementation compatible with both JavaScript and TypeScript. And so kind of the ingredients, or like the things that you would need to create an Apollo server, are type definitions, and that's that schema that I was talking about, kind of like a menu. Then your resolvers, which are just functions that say like how to get your data. And then these data sources. So the cool thing about GraphQL, and maybe like a misconception for folks that aren't familiar with it, I feel like we see a lot of like articles just like out there in the community that are like GraphQL versus REST, like they kind of pit one against the other. But actually, like, you can use GraphQL with REST. It's actually a really great layer over your REST APIs. Are y'all familiar with like the backend for front end pattern in?
I've heard about it.
Yeah, so it's like if you're using like REST APIs, for example, and you don't have GraphQL, oftentimes, and this is like a pattern I used when I was an engineer, you'll have a backend for front end, and that will kind of take all your different like REST APIs and get those responses and kind of combine them together, and then into an object that then can be like sent to the client that you'll then use in your apps. And so GraphQL actually like does that work for you with like combining different data sources. And so what's cool is when you adopt GraphQL and actually put it as a layer over your REST APIs, you can eliminate those backend for front end services, delete all that code, and it just works really, really nicely with REST. And you can actually just migrate incrementally, adding one endpoint at a time. It doesn't have to be this like big transformation. So that's kind of a tip that I'll give folks when you're seeing those GraphQL versus REST articles. You do not need to pick one over the other. You can just actually connect your REST API as a data source and then incrementally migrate one endpoint at a time.
So on that point, then, and I know you're going to show us some demos. I don't want to cut you off.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, so you're showing a JavaScript demo right now. For a lot of JavaScript folks, I might be using like Express or Fastify or name your framework X, right?
Yeah.
Would you say the Apollo server is something that I can run alongside, or is there like middleware that runs on top of these existing things, or is it something that is like a completely separate server that listens at its own port and it's a completely different infrastructure?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So the default Apollo server package that I'm showing here, this is Express, but we have adapters for just about every like HTTP framework. So all the ones that you mentioned, like Express, like Koa, Happy, we have adapters for like Lambdas as well for running in serverless environments. There's like literally adapters for everything that you can just use as middleware. So you can use that on an existing server and migrate incrementally. But we really do, like, once your graph gets beyond a certain size, it does make sense to kind of split that out into its own server running like as its own infrastructure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. Well, why don't we first dive into the schema, because that is kind of like the heart of your graph, and that's like where all the magic happens. So you mentioned before that you had used Hasura before, and so there's a couple of different like vendors that provide like auto-generated schemas over your databases. Which is definitely like an interesting way to like get up and running really quickly. Typically with like Apollo server, and what we recommend is actually writing your own schema by hand, because the schema should be driven by the client's needs, right? And so oftentimes if you're just auto generating something, you don't want to tightly couple your schema to your data model. Maybe in certain senses, like, you know, if you're the same developer working on both, you don't care, or you just kind of want to get started quickly and kick the tires on something. But certainly, like, we recommend crafting your schema by hand, only putting properties that you're actually going to like query inside your apps, and just like keeping it like very agile so you can evolve it over time.
That's pretty interesting. Just a question on that one.
Yeah.
So like who writes one of the things that I keep hearing about GraphQL is that it makes it easier for front end and back end developers to kind of collaborate and just it's easier to it's a pattern that makes it easier to work when you have that type of split. So like who writes the schema? Like does it matter?
Yeah,
Or
so I think it's actually most effective when front end and back end teams, before you start writing any code, right? And you can even integrate your designers into this process. Start with the schema first. Like, take a look at the design and say, okay, like, what data do I need in order to build this page? And then just write out an example schema. What's really cool is that you can actually, Apollo server has built-in mocking. So you can just type in like one line of code, mocks equals true, into Apollo server. And if you don't even have your resolvers built yet, it'll mock out that data. So then once you agree on your schema kind of as like a contract, then the front end teams can use the mocks and start building UI against that. And then the back end teams can write the resolvers and connect those to the data sources and make sure, you know, the queries are performant. And so I think it's just a really great collaboration point for both sides to kind of agree on that up front.
awesome.
Cool. Okay, well, let's kind of dive into the schema file then. So if you can kind of think of like your GraphQL API, kind of like of the roots of a tree, right? Everything starts with like the query. That's kind of the root at which like all of your different types are going to come from. And so in this app, it's you kind of have this grid of different tracks. It's called Castronauts. It's like a learning platform for cats, is the demo app that you'll build. So you can get tracks for the homepage. You can get a single track. You can also fetch a specific module. And then then you have mutations as well. So queries are for reading data, mutations are for writing data. And so if we go into kind of, this one is probably the simplest one. You're passing this ID argument, and then that will return back a track. And so as you go in here, these are the different, you know, fields that make up a track. So you can kind of picture like, okay, if I was building this from scratch, I want to look at the mock that my designer gave me. What are the properties here that I need to like build this card or build this list? And then you use that as you're creating your schema. So this particular app, we're going to have an ID, a title, a thumbnail. So these ones, like ID, string, int, those are called scalar types. So they don't have any other types like branching off of them. But author, for example, then that will point to an author type, and then we can define that as well. One thing that's really cool about GraphQL is that it's statically typed. And so it works amazingly with TypeScript. It's really great for just like enforcing types across your whole app. And all of the developer tooling, if you write in kind of comments, will show that, which is really, really nice as you're building queries to just kind of see, okay, like what is this used for? The other thing that makes GraphQL different than REST is with REST, you generally like don't version your APIs, right? Like you query a REST endpoint and you expect to get the same response back every time. But with GraphQL, it works a little bit differently. You have one endpoint that you hit with that query, and then you could get back any number of different responses based on whatever your query shape is. So what's really cool is you can actually evolve a GraphQL API over time. And the way that we do that safely without worrying about breaking our clients is we use the deprecated directive. So say you are migrating that over, we had length, right? Now we want to change it to duration in seconds to be more specific. So here we'll just put this directive saying, oh, this is deprecated, use this instead. And then in the tooling, you'll see that, so you'll know not to use those fields.
That's pretty cool. So when you're using GraphQL, you're not going to have like a V1 GraphQL type of situation.
No,
Am I reading that right? Okay.
Not at all.
So with this deprecate, this one's pretty interesting. So with this deprecated directive, it gives you a reason. So is there no way to have access to the length at that point?
No, so you can use it, but it'll just kind of like show up in the tooling that you shouldn't use it. Let's actually pop in. So when you run your GraphQL API, you'll get back when you start it up, you'll enter into this sandbox. And so this is a tool that we have. It's like a IDE for your graph, which is kind of fun. And so if I'm looking at, see this one, this was length. This was the one that was deprecated. And so this will show up with like a little warning sign, and it'll tell me like, hey, like use this one instead. So if I'm a developer like building the app, I know, okay, not to use this one and to use this one. But this one will still work, right? Like we don't want to break existing clients. So this is still going to work, but it just gives everybody like a way to migrate incrementally without like worrying about breaking things.
That's pretty different, and that is definitely pretty cool. So you can essentially evolve your graph over time without having to worry about, oh, this is gonna break the contracts that I've already established. Do I have to roll out another version of my API? It's just kind of, you just have to essentially make sure that it's inside of the schema, and that if it has been deprecated, you do deprecate it. I noticed a lot of comments in there. And it made me wonder, like, how do you end up? How does documentation work? Do you like use Swagger? Or?
Yeah, so you don't use Swagger. This kind of just comes for free with GraphQL, right? As long as you comment out the fields in your schema, that will automatically populate in the tooling. So kind of when I hover over these, for example, I'll know exactly what it is, which is really nice. And that's like the great thing about GraphQL is like, I feel like with Swagger, you have to kind of like hand roll those definitions, and those can easily get out of date if folks like aren't paying attention. So because everything's just like built into the schema, you kind of get it for free with GraphQL, which is really nice.
That's pretty neat.
Nice. So we had one question. So we have Steve McCardle. He's hanging out with us from YouTube, and he did have one quick question.
Yeah.
And that question was, so what does GraphQL have to do with Stripe? And I kind of want all of us to answer that question, because I feel like obviously we're all kind of involved in it. I'll say Stripe is an API. Like as a company, like our main product is an API, right? And I think a part of this conversation that we're having with Peggy right now is us just understanding how APIs work, understanding how GraphQL works as an API, not just RESTful APIs, but GraphQL APIs. And then hopefully, maybe later in this conversation, we could talk about how Apollo and Stripe could work together. And we could talk about like how, we can flow information from one part to another. Again, for me, like APIs are things that we want to compose together, right? And Stripe is just one thing of many things you'll have in your application. So we're kind of looking at like some of the other things that you want to wrap around your Stripe app. So Peggy, I don't know if you have anything you might want to add to that.
Yeah, I think you explained it perfectly, right? Like Stripe is just like another API that you would use, and when you have multiple APIs that you're using in order to build your app, that's where GraphQL comes into play. And what's really nice about the graph is once I add the Stripe API as a data source into my graph, then I only have to write that logic once, and then the mobile teams, like they can query, using those fields and use the Stripe API. And so once you write it once, then multiple clients can then use that themselves without having to write all that data fetching code. So yeah, it's definitely, although Stripe like is a REST API, you can use it really nicely with GraphQL to add payments really quickly to your app.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll also just throw it out there that we use GraphQL internally. So our internal teams have used GraphQL to build internal services. I believe that the actual Stripe dashboard uses GraphQL, and the Stripe dashboard is making API calls. So in a sense, not only does like GraphQL have something to do with Stripe, we like use it, and we have kind of proof that it works well with GraphQL because you can kind of see it in places in the Stripe dashboard. So it's relevant in a lot of ways, I would say.
Nice. So Steve, hopefully that answers your question. If you have any more questions, feel free to go ahead and drop them in the comment section and let us know. Let us know if that makes sense. So Peggy, I'll let you go ahead and get back to it.
Yeah, let me go back to our app actually, because I feel like this might make it a little bit more concrete. So we talked about our schema and kind of, our schema is like a menu. We define the different properties that we're going to need in our app. So how does the schema actually turn into data that we then send back to the client? So that's where the resolvers come in. So resolvers are just like functions, right? Like if I go back here to the playground, once I make this query, then this tracks for home function is going to execute, and then these length and duration and sections functions are going to execute. So that's really all a GraphQL query is. It's just a series of functions getting called in order to give you your data. So in the one that we just ran, we have data sources are just kind of an abstraction that we use to decouple implementation details from like your APIs and your resolvers, because you want to kind of keep them thin and lean. But we just return this function where we get the different tracks. And we can actually pop into this because this is actually a REST API, believe it or not. So we have this REST data source, and this is just a class that actually gives you a resource cache for free, which is kind of nice. So you can just input this REST API. You get some like little helper functions to make it really easy to query the various endpoints that you have. And then you can call these functions like in your resolvers. So say, you were going to integrate the Stripe API into your GraphQL server, you would just create a data source for the Stripe API, and then you would be able to use that across all of your resolvers. And these data sources can be literally anything, right? We have some community packages for MongoDB, SQL databases. Some of our customers use GraphQL for gRPC and Thrift. So like literally any type of API works with GraphQL and Apollo. You just like make it a data source, plug it into your resolvers, and let GraphQL do the rest, which is kind of nice.
That's pretty nice. So it could be anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be an API. Could just like a SQL query also be kind of like a resolver as well?
Or
not so much?
Yeah, well, you like say you were using like an ORM to kind of like hit a SQL database. You could put that in your resolvers. Yeah, pretty much any kind of like data that you need access, you can call it in your resolvers. The other nice thing that you can do is like data transformation. So oftentimes when folks are doing a lot of like data transformation on the client, like say they are querying a REST API and then they're getting that back and then they're like doing some filtering or combining things and changing different properties on that object, you can actually just abstract that back to your resolvers, which is kind of nice. And then that logic is reusable. You can use it for different queries, different apps without having to like write it yourself, which is cool. Yeah, so it's all about just like, what is the type of data that my client needs? And then you kind of use your resolvers to kind of do that transformation, do that querying to return it back into the form that the client needs.
Super neat.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about the schema. We talked about resolvers. Do we have any questions about resolvers or data sources before we move back to the IDE?
I do have one small question. I don't know if
Yeah.
this is related specifically to resolvers, but I'm curious. Is there the concept of like of middleware of things that run before and after my resolver? So I might want to, after I pull this data back from this REST API, maybe I want to like transform it on some way, or I don't know, maybe I want to apply like authentication or logging or caching or any of those types of things. I don't know if that's a GraphQL thing or if that's like something that Apollo can add additionally, like, but does that exist?
Yeah, so the different like arguments to the resolver function. So the first is the parent, and that's kind of the object like before that function is run. Then you have arguments, and then the third one, which is what you're talking about, is context. So that's something that's shared by all of the resolvers, in the chain. And so authentication is a really great example. You would perform that auth outside of the resolvers, and then you can just add it. There's a context property that you can do. So anything that needs to be shared, like auth, or maybe you have like some utility functions for transforming data, you would just add that to the context, and then all of the resolvers can use that.
Got it. Because I'm thinking so again, if I'm thinking about how I plug together Apollo and Stripe, so whenever we make Stripe calls, there's API keys that we want to apply to that client, right, to that SDK.
Yeah.
But those have really nothing to do with my GraphQL. Those are very specific to like me calling into Stripe.
Yeah.
So you're saying if I wanted to, I could use like the context or like one of those options to like attach my keys or whatever the case is, right? And then now that'll flow out to the request and come back. But from the consuming side, from the person that's consuming the GraphQL query, like that consuming client doesn't really need to know about that, right? Because that will be now a little bit more deeply integrated into however that happens in the background.
Of course. Yeah, exactly like you said it. So if I were integrating the Stripe API, I would just call that function to create the Stripe client, and then I would attach that to the context, and then all of my different resolvers could use that Stripe client to like do whatever they needed with the Stripe API.
Okay, gotcha. That makes sense.
Cool. That was a really great question. Sweet. So maybe we can just go back to the IDE for a second. So what's really awesome about this is like it's so like easy and simple to just like click around and create whatever queries you need, and it'll automatically just like populate this and say, okay, this is an author type. You need to like select some fields here, and then you can just hit play and it'll like give you the data that you need. It also allows you to view it in table form if you're like a spreadsheet kind of person. This is nice if you need to like download the data, for example, and then like spit it back to like maybe a product person on your team, for example. So it's really nice to just like have those different options. Why don't we, with our remaining time, obviously this is kind of cool, but it's like a little bit of a toy app, right? Like this is what you're going to build for your first app as you're completing the Odyssey course. I was thinking we could also go to the GitHub API, because GitHub uses GraphQL, and that's like a API we're all familiar with.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Let's do it.
That would be great.
Sweet. All right, let's do it. So if I'm going into the GitHub API, it is like huge, right? There's so many different things that you can query. So what's really nice is Explorer has this like Command K spotlight search. So say I'm like looking for fields like on repositories, I can like find everything without like searching. It'll kind of show me the different descriptions, and if I like select that, it'll automatically populate, which is cool. The other thing, which is really fun, that we actually just launched last week, this has like been a highly requested feature for folks, is what we call operation collections. So as you're working kind of with GraphQL APIs, or say you're like a client developer, testing out queries for your app, you kind of have like the same queries that you're running again and again. And what we've done is we've made it really easy to like save those and be able to share them with your team. So folks on my team created a collection for the GitHub API. And so I can just go here and click like get issues, and it'll automatically populate the query for me, which is super cool. And so this one takes a couple of variables. So we're going to need to plug those variables in there. Why don't you give me like, what's like a repo on the Stripe org and GitHub?
Let's Stripe samples. Stripe-samples is a good one, I think.
Stripe samples. Okay, so this one is going to give me all of the last 10 open issues on Stripe samples.
All right. Oh, does it not?
Isn't.
No, Stripe samples is the.
Is it under Stripe?
Oh yeah, Stripe samples is the organization. Another one. So if you do Stripe-samples as the org,
okay.
You can do accept. So yeah, and then do accept -a-payment.
Accept a payment. Okay, cool. Great. Okay, so now we see some issues here. So it looks like somebody is curious about the checkout page code. They have a question. Looks like there's not many issues though, so y'all must be doing a really great job grooming those issues.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Well, we're querying for 10 and only 2 are coming up, so y'all must be doing something right.
Okay, well, do you want to try a different repo then, maybe?
Yeah, like there's tons of open issues on Apollo.
Okay, how about we do? All right, so let's go to the Stripe org, the Stripe account, and then let's go to, in terms of the actual repo, /Stripe, and then let's grab like whatever the first one is.
Stripe-.net. That's perfect. We were just talking about .net.
Perfect. I swear this is not. I didn't do that on purpose. I did not know that was on the top there, but that's perfect.
You planned it.
I think this is a sign that I need to start like getting booted up on the .NET ecosystem. I'm seeing this as a sign.
It's always a good time to get started, right?
Totally. Cool. Okay, so we can kind of like view this in table view, and you can kind of see like what's the title, the person that logged in, the URL. Looks like Clement 911 has a bunch of issues. Unable to use client from Azure Functions. Yeah, so if you're ever looking to kind of like explore the GitHub API and just poke around, this is a really great way to do it. We also have some other queries too that we could try. So get repository stars is one. We could just do stripe.net again and see. Over 1,000 stars. That's a good amount of stars. Very cool. Nice. Clearly there's some .NET fans in the Stripe ecosystem. I'm curious, like what out of all the different like SDKs that y'all have, like which ones are the most popular?
Oh, that's a good one.
I don't know. I haven't looked at it personally, but I would make an assumption, and I would guess PHP, Ruby, and JavaScript, maybe?
I'm gonna guess PHP. The internet's basically just PHP and
PHP,
HTML.
yeah, sure. But I think a lot of that too is because a lot of our folks that use Stripe use them through plugins, right? So if you think about, what are some of the WordPress, PHP shopping cart plugins that automatically use Stripe? For you as the person that's using it, you probably just add your account, but in the back end, they're probably using our SDKs and stuff like that. So every time you spin up an instance of that thing using that plugin, there's probably some Stripe stuff going on in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about it that way, but that totally makes sense because everybody's using WordPress. We use WordPress as well, for our blog and certain microsites. Cool. And then our last query that we can run in the GitHub API with this collection is get repositories. So this will actually get my last 10 repositories. So we can kind of see what's going on here. Looks like I have some just example apps, my wedding site, a demo app that I was working on. So it's cool. If you're ever looking to play around with the GitHub API and just explore that for yourself, we can actually drop the link maybe in the comments.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Cool. How do you share these collections? Are they just where do they live? Do you have to make them for?
They're cloud. So if you create an account with Apollo, you can share, save these collections and then share them with your team. You don't have to create an account to use it, however. So just running it locally, as I was doing for the last app, you don't need to log in for that. You can just run it locally and run your queries. But if you want to save your work, obviously you'll have to create an account.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Got it. So Peggy, I know we have just about 12 minutes, a little bit under 15 minutes left. I do want us to talk a little bit more about Apollo, because I feel like we've spoken a lot about GraphQL, and you showed us Odyssey, which looks really cool, and the studio that you have. I'd love to know more about the role that Apollo kind of plays in this GraphQL space. Earlier you mentioned that there was the open source server, and you showed us a little bit about that, but what else does a company layer on top of GraphQL?
Yeah, absolutely. So Apollo, we are, really kind of the company that has invested so much into the GraphQL ecosystem. We have dozens of open source libraries for any GraphQL developer to use. Obviously, GraphQL is just a spec, right? So you can use our tools, or you don't have to use our tools, but 90% of GraphQL implementations are using Apollo either on the server or the client. So we definitely are one of the most popular choices. We also try to give back to the GraphQL community. So we run GraphQL Summit, which is the first and largest GraphQL developer conference. We run that in the fall. We've been virtual for the past couple years, which has been really fun, but we're trying to see if maybe we can get everybody back together again. Fingers crossed. Obviously we have Odyssey, which is our learning platform for GraphQL. And then, hiring and sponsoring GraphQL open source developers too, the lead maintainer of GraphQL JS, which is, framework agnostic, right? That's just the reference implementation for GraphQL. He works at Apollo. We're always trying to, give back to the GraphQL community and push the ecosystem forward.
Nice. So if folks want to get started with GraphQL, so you have Odyssey, but then would you say Apollo is something that's fairly easy for new folks to just kind of, hey, I might know JavaScript and I might know a little bit of Express or Happy or one of these other things? Is this something very easily that I could just pick up and, I don't know, maybe in my first 30 minutes, can I create a GraphQL, or maybe even less than that? Can I create my first GraphQL thing with Apollo and not lose any more here that obviously I don't have any more left, but you get the point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So for folks looking to get started, if you want to go to our learning platform Odyssey and just take that first course, you will learn how to build your first graph, make your first queries, and then connect that to a web app with Apollo Client in less than 30 minutes. So it's like a really good full stack tour of the platform. And definitely let us know what you think, and if it's helpful. We have a feedback form at the end of the courses, and all those surveys get funneled into a Slack channel, and we literally read everyone. So let us know like how your experience was, and if there's anything that we could do to simplify it or make it easier.
Awesome.
I guess one of my questions about GraphQL, when I was looking at learning GraphQL a little while ago, one of the things I got caught up on was like one of the things that I read over and over again was like, if you're just starting with GraphQL, maybe Apollo is too heavyweight. I don't know if that's really true or not, but if you're getting started with GraphQL, do you have to do all of the things with Apollo? Is there like a more minimal version or more minimal approach? Is it really that different from using a more bare bones GraphQL client, or not? Not really.
So I would say I guess on the client side, you can just use regular fetch, right? Like you don't need to use a GraphQL client. You could just use fetch and do a post request to that GraphQL endpoint. There's also GraphQL request is another popular package that folks use for making like simple GraphQL requests. What Apollo client does is actually provide you a normalized cache. So because unlike REST, where you have like different endpoints and the browser caches those resources for you, that doesn't happen with GraphQL because you only have one endpoint and like any number of responses that you could get back. And so you have to have that caching on the client. And so that's what Apollo client gives you. What's really nice is that it is like intelligent. So say you create a mutation, and then it will just kind of know to update all of the different queries in your app, so you're not having to like manage that yourself. It also has local state management included too, so you definitely don't have to use it for like very simple things. But I think once you're starting to get into like an app that you're taking into production, you really should take a look just for the normalized caching benefits.
Yeah, caching is worth the price of entry, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, and the state management too, right? Like one of the cool things about Apollo Client is once you start using it, you don't need to like rule your own state management with Redux anymore. You can just kind of remove all that, and we have this like use query hook that makes it super simple. It handles like your loading and your error states for you. It has helper functions with pagination. Say you have like local state in your app, you could actually just kind of attach that to the cache as well and just like query it all from one spot instead of like having to manage that independently. So it has a lot of nice little helpers that just make app development more delightful and fun.
That's pretty awesome. I noticed you said hooks, so I'm imagining React. Do you have like parity between like the different front end ecosystems, or is it more like people tend to use React with Apollo GraphQL more so, and that happens to have more development?
Yeah, so React is obviously our most popular client integration, and that's the one that we support officially. But we also have a lot of really awesome community maintained integrations as well. So Angular Apollo is a popular one for Angular developers. We also have Vue Apollo, which is really, really fantastic. Ionic, I believe, has one. Like there's one for web components. Like literally the community has created so many, because the core of Apollo client is actually just JavaScript, and then the React like hooks are just kind of a layer on top of that. So regardless of what front end framework you use or want to use in the future, Apollo client supports it, because at the end of the day it's just JavaScript.
Just JavaScript. Awesome.
Yeah.
see what else. I mean, the other thing I wanted to kind of get into, we don't have a ton of time, but I wanted to ask you about error handling because, again,
Yeah.
I've only done surface level stuff on top of GraphQL, but one, it's basically a meme. It's like, you know, you get a 200 with an error. But I've also heard that error handling with GraphQL is in some ways better. Can you talk a little bit about what it looks like and what the advantages might be?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the patterns that we recommend, which there's a really awesome GraphQL engineer, their name is Sasha. They work at Twitter. They've done some talks on this, but you actually model the errors in your schema. So it's like, depending on, you know, like maybe you have like some partial data and you want to display something to your user, you can actually just model the shape of those errors in your schema, and then you send that back to the client, and then you can kind of whatever you know, you're going to display based on the partial data that you got, then you're able to kind of use that. So I just, you know, recommend building your errors into your schema just like anything else, and like really thinking about, okay, what are the different error states that a client like might get into, and then you know, just kind of working that in, which has been a really nice pattern.
And you can get partial data back. So like if one resolver fails, you get an error for that one, and then the rest you just get the data.
Yeah.
Like,
so yeah, partial data is totally a thing.
no, it's pretty neat. That is pretty cool. Well, let's see. Do we have any questions from the comments?
No, I think we answered all the questions. Looking at our friend Steve said, we do use Apollo for some of our features, but not like the usual use case. That'd be interesting to hear what they're using it for. But it sounds like you have some customers that are checking us out, Peggy. So that's always a good thing.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Steve, definitely let us know your interesting use case. We love to see what folks are building and how they're using Apollo in unusual ways. So definitely let us know.
All right. So, I mean, we're nearing the end. I definitely think one that I'm going to have to, I didn't know you had like that resource for actually learning GraphQL. So I'm going to have to check that one out myself. And for anyone who happens to be watching, it seems like an amazing resource. Learning by doing is always great. But before we go, Peggy, do you have any like plugs, things you want to let people know about GraphQL, things that are on a horizon, things to watch out for?
Yeah, so I think it's really cool that y'all are like investing in YouTube. We are as well. We have a video team that's part of the DX org, and we just created a new concept series on GraphQL. So we have our first 2 videos up. If you go to our YouTube page, we're releasing like short form videos almost weekly, and they are really highly produced with like cool animations and just really awesome. So if you're looking for more educational resources, maybe even like a gentler introduction just to learn like the concepts before you start coding, definitely check out our YouTube page. There's a lot of great stuff there.
All right, let's take a look. That's the Apollo GraphQL page, the official one, right?
Yeah.
Let's put. Okay, let's put that one in the comments. I think I saw a familiar face pop up.
It's my face, I know. So funny.
Yeah,
and I went ahead and put the link right here on the screen. So folks, if you want to go check it out, youtube.com/Apollo GraphQL. And it looks like you have a few playlists, and like you said, there's some new videos on there too. So for folks, go over there and check it out.
Cool. Yeah, definitely check it out. Let us know in the comments what types of videos that you want to see next.
Awesome. Well, Peggy, thank you so much for coming on. Thought this was great. I definitely want to check out Odyssey. It looks like it's really well done. And I'll make sure to subscribe to that Apollo GraphQL YouTube channel as well.
Sweet. Well, thanks so much for having me on. This was a lot of fun. as always, if folks have GraphQL questions that we didn't get to answer, or you're watching the replay and they pop up, feel free to just at Peggy Rayzis on Twitter, and I will definitely read your questions and answer them if I can. Or if you have any feedback about Apollo, like we love hearing your feedback and your pain points and figuring out how to make them better. So definitely don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Peggy, for showing us all that cool stuff about GraphQL. I'm really looking forward to doing Odyssey myself and learning more about GraphQL. So thanks again. Thanks to the audience for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.